Ethnic and racial identity of the Ukrainians. So Ukrainians are part of an Eastern Slavic ethnicity, and in terms of their racial background, um, this study found that 77% of Ukraine was Ukrainians in 1959, and that is back when they were part of the Soviet Union. And a large part of Ukraine, that last 23%, was actually Jewish and Polish populations, and about one-fourth of the world's Jewish population actually lived in ethnic Ukrainian territory. So, like I mentioned, Ukraine was once part of the Soviet Union, which means that many Ukrainians have close ties to Russia, its people, and their traditions. But while they may have ties to Russia, they still identify as a different ethnicity entirely. Since Ukraine was once part of the Soviet Union and they declared their independence, there are many Russian racial background elements within the Ukrainian culture. Ukraine also has a large Polish and Jewish population in the country, which unfortunately decreased greatly during the time of the Holocaust.
Where did the Ukrainians derive their value from? Well, from religion and mythology. According to Ukraine.com, religion has had an impact on the Ukrainian way of life for a very long time. And additionally, the history of the Ukrainian people has had an impact on the values that they have. Ukrainians in their past history had often been under slavery under various groups, and they were even enslaved by their neighbors, the Russians. In fact, even as recent as 1991, Ukraine was under the rule of the Soviet Union. Certainly, this historical struggle and oppression has caused the Ukrainian spirit to become more fervent and has given reason to the people to more greatly cherish the values that they have. For example, family, a value that is part of the Christian religion.
Ukrainian is the official language of Ukraine, the second largest country in Europe. The Slavic people of that region, also known as the Slavs, populate 14 of the 44 countries in Europe. Of those 14 nations, the Ukrainian language shares linguistic styles with the Eastern Slavs, which includes the people of Russia, Poland, and Slovakia. Of course, as people migrate across the region, their native language follows them. Today, although Ukrainian language remains the prominent language in rural western Ukraine, Russian language is spoken by the majority of citizens in the more urban northern, southern, eastern, and central parts of the country. Because the country is split when it comes to how they speak with each other, Ukrainians are generally fluent in speaking both Ukrainian and Russian languages. Ukrainian people are known to be very family-oriented culture who still greatly value their time together. Because of that closeness, family members commonly cohabitate, with newborns all the way up to great-grandparents living under the same roof and pitching in to help the others in any way possible. But their warm, friendly relationships don't stop at just family members. The Ukrainian people are known throughout Europe for their traditionally hospitable nature, which they extend to family as well as towards complete strangers. Because of their graciousness and their value of relationships, Ukrainians won't hesitate to open their homes to share food, drink, and conversation with anyone. With Ukrainians, everyone is welcome.
Health beliefs and practices of the Ukrainian people. This article is focusing on vaccines primarily, but still references other medical practices. And what it shows is that there's a lot of distrust in Ukraine's people in the medical field, especially in the homeland of Ukraine. The study found that they were more likely to get medical treatment in other countries instead of returning home. And as mentioned here, Poland is a significant one, as there are many Ukrainian people in Poland. Specifically, this study found that vaccinations many would obtain false immunization certificates in Poland to avoid the mandates. However, their children, they still got the vaccine for, which is an interesting tidbit there. One reason that they may have distrust for Ukraine's government is that the government had a lot of misinformation and would deter many people from wanting to use the government-provided healthcare. Another very common medical practice is the use of home remedies, herbs, and berries. This is again stems from the distrust of the government, most likely, and wanting to be independent in whatever ways possible, as well as being a cheap alternative to private medicine.
Religious beliefs and spirituality of the Ukrainian people. In the first place, Christianity and mythology are two key factors in the religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs of the Ukrainians. But Christianity is the main religion. According to Ukraine.com, Christianity is official, paganism is national. So there is certainly an influence that mythology has on the culture. However, significant portions of the Ukrainian population have some sort of tie with the Christian church. Yet there is this ironic situation in which many do affiliate with Christianity, yet many are indifferent to the religion. Therefore, there is sort of an interplay between these two. Spirituality for Ukrainians includes a belief in the existence of God, but things like heaven and hell are not necessarily acknowledged by all or by the culture at large. Certainly, this impacts spirituality and the sense of a person's duty. For if one does not necessarily believe in heaven or hell, this would affect how they interact with the spiritual world.
Being centered in Europe, the region which the United States was birthed from, the life cycles and rituals of Ukraine are very similar to ours, since we share many of the same customs and religious beliefs. Birth, marriage, and death are all important marks to be recognized throughout the Ukrainian person's lifetime. While the events of birth and death are generally not within the control of the Ukrainian people, the details surrounding the planning of weddings are. Holding on to some of the old traditions of their ancestors, weddings in Ukraine are viewed as a time of great celebration. Because they love large groups and sizable gatherings, those extravagant events typically host hundreds of local village participants, and the festivities generally last for a few consecutive days filled with music, food, dancing, fellowship, and celebration. At one time, the Ukrainians used to carry out unique practices relating to important events like birth, coming of age, and death. Like within the US, though, many of those old traditional customs have since been discontinued. Following their Catholic principles, the Ukrainian birth is still prepared for with a baby shower, and the birth is followed by baptism and a christening ceremony. The death of a Ukrainian typically involves open casket viewing, a funeral service, and a burial ceremony. As in the US, those practices generally have no impact on their health care.
Nutritional behavior and diet. It is assumed in Ukraine's culture that homemade food is healthy food, which ties into them not eating out very often, as eating out is considered a luxury. And why else would you go out to eat when food at home is perfectly good and healthy? The only other reason would be as a luxury. The diet that they primarily eat is high in animal products such as meat and dairy, which ties all the way back to the 1960s when Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, as the diet was based off what was available and what the government decided was a good dietary guideline for them to follow. Bread is served at most meals, and the reason for this is that bread is a symbol of hospitality and welcoming. As well, the bread was once considered a necessity for health, which would then be considered a welcoming gift now, and wishing of good health on your guests by giving them bread. The best food is often offered to guests first. It is a way of showing hospitality to them, and is usually considered polite for the guests to try each and every dish at the table.
Do Ukrainians in the United States have ready healthcare access, and in terms of equality, how do they stand? Well, according to novoukraine.org, Ukrainians do have access to the Medicaid insurance program in the United States, as long as they're under a certain socio-economic standing, they have access to this healthcare. So in terms of healthcare access, the Ukrainians are not lacking. And in regard to their experience or equality treatment, they have a higher quality of healthcare. According to the Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion, whites have a higher quality of care over minorities like the blacks, the American Indian, Alaskan Native people, and so on. So the Ukrainians who are considered white are at a greater advantage.
In general, Ukrainians within the U.S. greatly value and respect our advanced healthcare system. In fact, that is one of the primary reasons that many Ukrainian citizens made the big move to migrate their entire family across the ocean to the United States. Even though that nation parted ways from the communist government of USSR in 1991, so much governmental corruption followed the newly independent republic and sadly is still present today. Many Ukrainian leaders have voiced their desire to improve their national healthcare system, but the continued dishonest spending has greatly affected the funding and the progress of their government-provided healthcare. For the past 31 years, the country has routinely experienced shortages of medical equipment and medications, and their medical technology is greatly outdated in comparison with most of Europe. With such poor funding, the society's low expectations have produced medical personnel with very mediocre education and training. And even with their experienced, highly skilled doctors, it's hard to expect much from them since their wages are so remarkably low, at poverty levels by American standards. Believe it or not, those professionals are paid an average of $100 per month. Needless to say, Ukrainian citizens in the U.S. are appreciative of and openly accept the generous, high-quality services that are offered by our healthcare system. And they are generally free of any noticeable conflict with it, with the exception of potential language barriers which may exist. As should be the case for nursing staff when caring for all patients. A nurse who is caring for a Ukrainian patient shall always be observant of potential barricades that exist, and they should look to do whatever they can do to remove those obstacles.